as a horse owner, you're starting from scratch, you want to know more about nutrition, what are the things that we need to know?
Is grass a problem? Because some people will now say that grass is a problem. This podcast is brought to you by Redwings Horse Sanctuary and Equilibrium Products.
Hello, happy Wednesday.
Hello, happy Wednesday. How you doing?
Good. How's your week been?
Yeah, good. The wind's in the east and the da-da-da-da. You know, the weather's...
I'm not doing this again. I'm not going to chime in.
Okay, well, the weather's changing. We're meant to get some rain, which is interesting. And I had an interesting conversation with my farrier yesterday. I know, yes, finally, yes, we do need rain. We've had one of the driest springs in 70 years.
Really?
Yeah, I saw that.
Wow.
I did see that. That isn't first-hand information. That is slightly second-hand through a comment that I read. So no one fact-checking on that. But it has been really dry. And me and my mum were talking about it. And she was like, well, the farmers are going to have to really adapt the way they're doing things. Yeah. And the guy that I've been supplied by hay for like over a decade, makes me feel really old. He was talking on Instagram the other day and he was saying how like a lot of the seed got washed away in autumn and then has been like too dry in the spring. So it's difficult.
I saw a post on Facebook from a farmer the other day and it kind of has done the rounds. People might have seen it anyway, but he was comparing the hay this year versus last year, I think. And he had a hay barn and it was like full versus like not a lot. Yeah.
I mean, they won't have cut very much. They will have maybe taken one cut so far.
It's early.
But what Mark was saying, Old Manor Farm, shout out for him because he's a legend. What he was saying is that they're going to struggle to take a second cut on the ryegrass. So they cut ryegrass for haylage. They also have cattle, I will mention. And actually, that brings us on to we're going to be talking to a nutritionist today. So that's really cool.
It's going to be cool.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully she can debunk some things for us. You know, some questions that no doubt all of us have.
Here it is. I've just found it because I wanted to give proper context. So it was from The Funky Farmer and they said, if you want to know the impact of this year's dry spring in South Gloucestershire, then look at these two photos. The top picture shows 2024's first cut silage. We filled the clamp and made 238 round bales. So in this picture, the barn is like half full of grass / whatever the word is for grass that gets turned into silage. The bottom picture shows this year's crop taken from the same fields which didn't even fill the clamp without any round bales made. 2025 is turning into a difficult year for farming for all of us. And the second photo, there's hardly anything there. So that's, yeah.
So, I mean, this might affect hay prices. Mm-hmm. Because if there's going to be less, then the farmers are likely to put the hay prices up. Things to consider, yeah. And also the things to consider, the interesting conversation I had with my farrier yesterday was he said he's seen 4 cases of laminitis in the last week.
Interesting.
One of which ended their life because it was so bad. I didn't have the whole story. They might have been old, but...
And is this what does the dry weather have to do with that? Because I know like spring, sugar spike, and therefore risk of laminitis, but why is it increased with dry weather? What is that? Or do we not know?
I think we should ask Claire about this today, but I'm pretty sure it is to do with grass becoming very stressed.
Ah, okay.
So because it's been dry, the grass is trying to exist and struggling, and because where it gets then eaten... I might just have a little...
short grass versus long grass. There's definitely... I think I've read something... Anyway, you have a look. Yeah, it's interesting. This whole environment thing is interesting because I keep thinking if the fields are getting wetter and wetter, which makes turnout more difficult and horses are spending more time in, but we have less available hay and forage, what does that mean? It's like both ends of the spectrum being crunched. And I sent Miri this picture on... I saw it on, I think it was on Facebook the other day, and it was a yard that was advertising for livery, and they had those lovely stables which have like back gardens. There is a proper word for it, but I don't know what it is.
It's like a patio.
They're really beautiful, like a patio, a little garden for the horses. And I just think that's a beautiful stable design. And for me, that was like a real step forward in like what we can give our horses as well as turnout. But then I realised that this yard was advertising, I think, because I didn't see any other fields, it as the winter turnout. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I'd class that as a turnout. But I guess some people, I guess you would, because they're like, well, they're outside. But I'm like, but you can't even pick up trot. Anyway, that was a smaller side.
No, I mean, they'd literally be able to, it's like a stable, an outdoor stable.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Yeah.
I've found the information. Dry weather, especially when followed by rain or frost, can increase the risk of laminitis in horses due to changes in grass composition and sugar levels. Stressed grass in drought conditions stores excess sugar that spike when rain triggers rapid growth. Frosty conditions also increase sugar levels in the grass as plants produce sugars for antifreeze, even if they can't utilise them for growth. The high sugar intake can trigger insulin resistance and inflammation in the hooves, leading to laminitis.
Interesting. I knew about the frost one, but I didn't know about the dry grass.
Yeah, so it's protection. The grass is trying to protect itself. And the interesting thing is we need to be really careful when we do get this rain. So in the UK, we are about to get some rain. If you're listening to this, we're recording this on the 23rd of May. As in, if this is not timely, maybe isn't. 2025. This maybe isn't relevant information, but be careful. So, and it'd be good to talk to Claire about some measures, basically. I wanted to touch on, before I ask you about your week, I wanted to touch on the conversation that we had last week about mares, when I got on my soapbox and got a bit upset about mare conversations. And it was super interesting because we didn't really get into it that deeply, but I had so many comments, and interestingly so many really well-rounded comments from TikTok, which is quite rare. Normally TikTok is full of really unhinged people that you think, how did you end up on the internet? But here we are. And the nice thing is a lot of people were drawing the comparison to women. And there's a really sad statistic about how long it takes for women to be diagnosed with things like endometriosis. And the average is like 7 to 8 years.
Jeez, I thought you were going to say months.
No. People like going and saying, I've got severe pain when I have my period. I've seen it loads and loads and loads on social media. I've got really severe pain when I have my period. I'm not coping. This is bad. I feel really unwell when I have my period. Like, it's not normal. Very heavy bleeding. Lots of these different things. And it can take such a long time because it's actually quite a hard thing to diagnose. Because often you can't see it on like an ultrasound. You have to actually have surgery to discover it. And I just think it's a really complicated thing, and I'm kind of proud to be and glad to be like talking about it a bit. And if the conversation with mares allows us to talk about women and women talk about mares, then I guess it's all power for good. So yeah, if you have supported that conversation, then thank you. And if any of you, I tell you what, this is a call out. I would love to have a conversation with an endocrinologist, a hormone specialist. So if you are one, a horsey one or a human one, I would love to have that conversation. Maybe maybe you've dealt with a hormone specialising vet. Maybe there's somebody who maybe you are an endocrinologist with humans. We would love to talk to you. Please reach out. I think that'd be cool, wouldn't it?
Definitely.
Love that. Nice. How's your week been?
Week's been good. Harley and I went to a clinic on Sunday. It was the same venue where a few months ago, if you've listened to the podcast consistently or seen my Instagram, I took him on my own, and when I moved arenas he was standing up a bit because he found the whole thing a bit stressful. Went back there and had a clinic, and it was pole work, and I put a clip on my Facebook, and it's on like 250,000 views. It seems to have really struck a chord with people, and it was about how when I arrived, she didn't even know our horses at this point. She didn't know that she had two. She had a 6-year-old and Harley, 7, and then she had an ex-racehorse. She just went, come on in, guys. If you want to walk around on foot for a little bit, let them explore, please do.
I love that.
I've never been to a clinic where they've said that before. And obviously for me now, it's become quite normal for me to do that. Like, I had a lesson with a top dressage rider, and I was like, I'm just going to walk him around quickly, let him see the mirrors, etc. And we did, and it was so sweet, and Harley's like exploring everything, and then I basically shared this clip where later on in the clinic he just looked super chilled and was like looking around in a really like lovely, curious way. And it was really nice. And I talked in the post about how it seems like we're moving towards this style of coaching now, which is very much like working with the horses, giving space for curiosity and relaxation. And it was really cool. So we had a lovely time. It was good.
That's really great. That's really nice, because somebody who maybe hadn't thought to do that might then go, oh, that's just
I can
different.
do that. Yeah.
I'm given, oh, okay, I would like to, but I've never known I could, and now I'm given space to, I'm going to try it. And then they realise, oh, actually, my horse really, that was a very different session because of that. So that's really cool. Well done.
Yeah. And actually, you've reminded me, a similar thing is I put up a whole clip from my lesson where, it was a clear round actually, and we've just started introducing fillers to Harley, and I just shared the whole thing because I thought it was really interesting for people to see that there's like different ways to do this. We had like a little filler, trotted up to it, Harley like stops at the last minute and was like, whoa, what is that? And my coach in the background was like, that's okay, stop him there, let him sniff it if he wants to, let him explore it if he wants to. And Harley, like top student, puts his head straight down immediately and is like looking at it. She's like, great, come round again. So he like trots up to it, kind of does a slightly bigger jump over it. We come round in canter and he jumps it without even looking. And actually a couple of days later we jumped it again, and again he didn't look. But it was interesting again to see people be like, oh, this is a really cool approach. Like, I think some people, it's really nice to be like, we all do it, don't we? We all see things and we're like, oh, I might try that next time. So like, instead of a horse stopping and you, I don't know, people giving them a big smack or, you know, whatever, just being like, maybe they just need a little moment to process. And my coach was saying the problem is some people will tell them off and then they'll come round, but that horse still hasn't processed the thing that frightened them, and so it doesn't actually make the situation any easier for them. So that was sort of an interesting moment as well.
I think as well, like, people are really worried that ever letting a horse stop is a problem.
Yes.
And actually, the reality is that isn't really a big deal. It's interesting though, because there is I've seen a few times, like, people taking horses out in hand over cross-country fences.
Yes, I've seen this, yeah.
And I do think that this is even like the precursory step to what you went through in that moment. So like having him on the on the rope or on the lunge line with the rope halter, so you've got connection but there's no like socking them in the teeth kind of feeling if it went a bit loose and then tight or something. And you do some work like over the pole and you let him make the choice. So you invite him forward and over it, and then they find their own way. And you got to that.
Yeah.
Of course, like you did that process, but with you on board. And it's really interesting because you can actually go back a step less as such when you're introducing these things. And that might be something that you could look at doing, is doing some work where there's no rider to say, do this, or I'm going to change, I'm going to give you some information. It's like, can you approach the difficult thing? Yes. Can you walk over it? Yes. Can you go through a pole next to it? Yes. Whatever, that was out of order, sync of process.
Yeah.
I just think this is great, like, that this kind of, and it's so great. The thing is, right, I know you're doing a good job. I know you are. You're doing a lovely job. You've got a wonderful coach. You've got a wonderful support network. But it's so good to see that there is an appetite for this on social media.
I was going to say that the whole just in hand being introduced in this really quote unquote natural way, like, it's not a big deal. Like, for some people, groundwork and the groundwork halter, it's a big step away from how they normally work. And actually, your introduction to groundwork could be as simple, I mean, you may disagree with this, Miri, I don't know, but it could be as simple as like, oh, we're just going to walk around in hand together before we get on. Like that, okay, you're not using a groundwork halter, you're not doing the patterns, but you're starting on the ground, which is more than you maybe have ever done before.
And the nice thing that happens there is it's about awareness. I say that word all the time, but it's like, where is my horse at? I think the thing that comes up that is difficult in that moment is, what do I do if it's not working? Right. That's where you need to have a process, right? You need to have some assistance or some ideas of what to do, because if if the other horse, for example, or you were in that moment and you had gone to walk Harley around that arena and he'd gone, shit me, this is terrifying, and then you were walking around in hand holding a fire-breathing dragon thinking, I don't actually know what to do, and now I've got, I'm at a clinic, I need to ride. Whereas if you were in that situation and he had been really over his limit or very spooky about something, you've got the tools, as in you personally, Rhi, because we've worked together and you've done the groundwork before. The groundwork that I do is take turning hind leg, move his body a little bit, bring the awareness back to his body, bring yourself back to that moment, slow everything down a little bit. So I guess maybe I'll give myself a little plug here, but if there is a moment in this where you're thinking, oh, this sounds really up my street, I would love to bridge the gap between when I tack up and when I ride my horse. I'd like to, do something within that space on the ground. I have a Patreon. It's full of wonderful information, and this is where Rhi has learnt what she does. We've had some online lessons as well, but the fundamentals were learnt through watching videos. So yeah, it is a wonderful thing. I'm so glad that there is a change in the tides, because it's happening.
Winds in the east is truly upon us.
True. Winds in the groundwork.
So I have a question for us that I think would be really interesting around time and motivation and things, which I think you'll have some really interesting thoughts on. Just before we dive into that, I'm going to thank the first sponsor of this podcast, Equilibrium. So I've talked before about Equilibrium's Heat Sense massage pad, and there was a period where I was using it every day on Harley. And the first time I ever put it on him in the stable, he leaned against, he's got kind of like a little ledge in his stable, and he put his mouth on it and he just dropped his lip and leaned on this thing. He looked blissful. And since then, obviously, he's become more used to it, and obviously I guess he's not as tight and what have you because the massage pad's doing its job. So the effect never looks quite as big. And anyway, there were a couple of weeks where, for whatever reason, I just hadn't been putting it on him. Maybe I felt like it was warm or we hadn't needed it or whatever. And I put it on him, and it was so funny because it was almost like the first time again. He kind of like, after about 20 minutes, his whole like face changed, his whole body changed. He went droopy again, and like I was like, oh, this is so interesting because you can obviously see the impact. And I just thought that was really lovely. So they offer the massage pad both as a pad, there's a mitt version, and Red Post also do a trial. So if you aren't sure whether you really want one or you want to see the effect before you truly commit, then you can try their trial. I'll put links to both in the show notes. And thanks so much to Equilibrium for supporting the podcast.
The lovely thing about that as well is when you do something like that, where you use an Equilibrium pad, I'm not fortunate enough to have one, but we have other practices on our yard. But I think it's important to mention, like, what comes out for me when you mention that is how slowly that practice is, like how slow that practice is. Putting a massage pad on and just being with your horse and grooming them and hanging out with them, like, that's such a powerful thing to do. We're always doing things, all of us. I know you're a very high-powered businesswoman and always on the go. And I love the fact that when you carve out that time for you and Harley, it is the proper amount of time. You spend the time, he wears the massage pad, you do the grooming, you hang out with him, then you have your lovely ride, or whether you don't, potentially, whatever it might be. And I think having things like an Equilibrium massage pad, like, almost pushes you,
forces you,
pushes you to have that time. So yeah, thanks Equilibrium for being the instigator of slowing down with our horses.
Do you know what? You're bang on. And I think this actually leads really nicely to our question, because when I use it, I know that it's going to run for like 30 minutes. And I've seen how it takes at least 20 for him to really get like into it. So I let it run for the whole thing. And it's funny because when I know that I'm going to put it on, I bring a coffee and I just sit and I don't know. I mean, I scroll, but I think scrolling is okay. That's part of my downtime, and I just let him wear his. So we had a question from a friend of mine, and she said, I've been listening to the podcast and I'd be interested to know yours and Miri's opinions on the guilt that equestrians feel for having a day off or not riding as much as you should. I put that in air quotes. Or having a dip in the motivation. How have you guys dealt with any of these problems if you'd experienced them?
Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot. I think it's important to remember where we're going or like what our goals are, because even as someone who rides horses professionally, and I don't mean I'm going to the Olympics, but I mean, I am I guess I'm. I don't know how.
You're a professional rider.
Yeah, I am a professional rider, but I guess I don't I don't look at the way I train my own horses as a professional. Like, I'm not trying to sell them. There's no like financial element to it, and I think that is the case for most of our listeners. Probably there will be, hopefully, the odd few professional rider who's listening who maybe does have to have financial gain from training horses, producing, selling, whatever it might be. But for me, like, I just remind myself, like with Blondie, a lot of the time, I'm never going to sell any of my horses, but I'm definitely, my goals with her are very kind of maybe different to what they are with Zora. Like with Zora, I'm a bit more consistent and I'm aware of her fitness a little bit more, and I'm kind of working towards maybe some competition goals. But with Blondie, if I don't have the time, or I'm rushing, or I don't feel my best, I'm really not that hard on myself about not doing something like productive, I suppose. And I think it's what people class as productive. Like, I think that going and hanging out with her for half an hour and grooming her and spending nice time with her is as productive as having a nice ride, potentially.
Yeah.
But I think people are often really hard on themselves, and I do think it comes from a bit of a culture on yards that can be a bit toxic. Like, oh, why aren't you doing that? Oh, you should be doing this. You, like with young horses, oh, you should be doing this by now. You should be doing that by now. And the reality is, like, who said who?
Yeah.
Who made up these rules? If you want to slow down and... Yeah, exactly, not the horses. You want to slow down and do less and hack out more and stop riding completely and fall back in love with just owning a giant horse dog, and whatever works is okay, and don't let anyone else ever tell you that it's not. If your horse is happy and healthy and has species appropriate management where they get to go in the field more than they get to go in the stable, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What's your take on it? What did you think when you saw that?
Well, I often think about this, and for me, a turning point was actually in getting Harley when he was 5. He's my first young horse, and it gave me a different kind, I hate to say permission, but it did. It gave me a personal permission to do less, because I was like, he's a young horse. Like, it's fine to give him a break. In fact, it's good to give him a break, and he's growing, so it's okay to slow down. And so initially it was his age that gave me permission in myself to be like, he can have a quiet week and it won't matter. And then actually I started to be like, oh, actually, if he were any age, I could do this and it wouldn't matter, sorry. And I think as long as your whole routine isn't falling apart, like, they're still being fed at the same time, they're still getting the turnout, like Miri said, I think that's important. But I think stopping riding for a few days, having time off here and there is completely fine.
This is important, that it is fine as long as we manage our expectations afterwards.
Yes.
Like, if you give your horse a fortnight off because you're having a busy time with work and whatever, you can't expect them to be the same as they were before the time off. So you may need to then adjust your expectations of what you ask them to do after that time.
Yeah, very fair point. And often, actually, Harley will have a week off and he'll come back and he'll feel really good and it'll be really nice. But equally, I think it's okay for you to lower your own expectations. So, for example, my lesson this week, I came onto the yard and I'd had a really, really stressful day, a late night and early morning, outside stresses, and I just was not feeling good and resilient, and I already knew I didn't want to jump, even though that's what we've been focusing on in our lessons, because I was like, I just don't have it in me to be resilient and mentory and relaxed. And then as I was walking down to the arena, 2 tractors turned into the yard with huge trailers on the back and a JCB to clear our muck heap, which is right next to the outdoor arena. And I was sort of like, okay, yep, this is a lot. And, a couple of years ago when Harley was literally 5, we would have probably sacked off the lesson completely and just gone for a hack. And this time we sort of had a chat and my coach was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I'd like to try and do a bit of work here. And we just simplified everything. We took us to the quietest part of the arena. We were going to work on small canter stuff from the prelims, so like 15-metre circles and stuff. And we didn't do that. We did something else. We simplified everything. We lowered the expectations. And I don't think... You're never going to walk away from a ride like that and be like, oh God, I really wish I'd pushed myself further and got really stressed and wound up my horse. And you don't think like that. You walk away from it going, yeah, that was a good ride. So I think the horse never walks away thinking, God, I wish that they really got after me and made me stressed. You know, they don't do that, and they don't care. They really don't care what you do with them, as long as they're looked after and they understand the questions you're asking them and they feel that it's fair. So I think I'd sort of sit down with yourself and be like, where's that guilt coming from? Are you worried about something from somebody else, or is it the horse? And then remind yourself that these are more simple animals than we think, and, you know, they're very forgiving and they want to be with us, but they don't care what we do, you know?
I think something that definitely helps, if you're finding that you're lacking the motivation and you're struggling, can you read the question? Did you read the question out fully?
Yeah, I did. Do you want me to read it again?
I'll just remind you what
So
this
it's
is.
opinion on the guilt that equestrians feel for having a day off, or not riding as much as you should, or having a dip in the motivation.
So I think as well, sometimes that is good to ask yourself where that's coming from. Because is it coming from the fact that you're actually having a hard time with your horse? You know, like, does it feel like uphill struggle every time you get on? Because I think if that is the case, then also reassessing what it is you're doing and how you're doing it might be part of that. I think I've definitely felt that before. Like when I was having difficult times with Blondie and it just felt like things weren't really going the right way, having some help or reassessing things is definitely a big thing. And I think sometimes like trusting your gut in that is important. Like, what's your gut telling you? Is it that it's just that you have had a little dip in confidence, or dip in motivation, or is it because actually every time you ride it's horrible?
Yeah.
Because it shouldn't be horrible. It actually does feel lovely when you ride a happy horse.
It does. But also, this isn't unique to equestrianism. Lots of athletes go through this. Lots of athletes have dips in motivation, and often how we might change this up, if we're in the gym, for example, we might change our exercises for a while, we might have a few extra rest days, we might train with a friend. So like, if you're struggling and it's dressage, can you hack for a bit? If your hacking confidence has gone downhill, can you hack with a friend? Can you do some jumping? Can you switch it up a bit? Can you give yourself a few days off and just hang out with your horse? You know, it's not, you are never going to be alone in this feeling. It happens everywhere. But as Miri said, I do think it's helpful to try and figure out why.
Yeah, I saw something as well a while ago. It was ages ago actually, and it was a coach, a PT, like super fit, amazing, strong woman, and she was like, "Oh, not like super sexy man."
When you said super fit, I was like, "Oh, Miri, where's George?" Like, he was super fit. Go on, sorry.
Oh yeah, he was well fit, innit? No, she was like super fit and healthy. God, you've got such a dirty mind. Joking. And she was saying, she was like, if you're not noticing the progress, it might be because you're not resting enough.
Yep.
And I think sometimes that can be the case. You know, horses are 365 days a year, 7 days a week, endless, 24 hours a day. You know, you can't stop thinking about it. And if you need to let yourself off the hook and have some downtime and have a fortnight where you don't think about training goals, you don't think about where you're going or what you're doing, you don't think about the next ride or what Sally around the corner said or what Peter on the other side of the yard is saying you should or shouldn't be doing, you just say, I'm not riding for 2 weeks. See what happens.
Yep.
I've had clients as well before, online clients that have, you know, been having a difficult time with the horse or whatever it might have been, and I've encouraged them to stop trying to do the hard thing. Because they're so caught in a loop of like, every time I ride, every time I hack, every time I do this, it's so difficult. And I say to them, could you try just doing the groundwork for 2 weeks? Just try it for 4 days a week, every day. You're just going to do the groundwork patterns that we're working on together. See where you go. Can you kind of hit that reset button and take the pressure off a bit? And it can be quite life-changing, because people really reassess, reaffirm where they are and what is important without that pressure of, I should be riding. I should. Who said who? There's no one chasing me around with a lunge whip telling me I have to ride my horses, you know?
And also, you just reminded me, like, so much can change in a couple of weeks, but equally, I was talking to someone, a professional that I work with recently, and they were saying one of their clients was really stressing out because I think they were pregnant and they were like, I don't know what to do with my horse. I don't want to sell them. Like, how am I going to afford to keep them in work? And no. And this professional was like, they have loads of land, and they just said to the owner, they were like, why don't you just turn them away for a year? And they were like, they said it was really interesting because they almost didn't feel like they had permission to do that with their own horse. And they were like, you can do whatever you want. The horse is yours. And it's funny, isn't it? But yeah, so I think, try it for a couple
and sometimes
weeks
we have to give ourselves permission.
Exactly.
And maybe that's what we're doing right now. I give you permission. Universal horse people. You have permission from Miri Hackett on the internet who says it's okay to give your horse a fortnight of no riding. You don't even have to do any groundwork. You can literally just turn them out in the field, get them in every day, pat them, turn them out again. Make sure they're fine. No harm will come. In fact, you may have a life-changing experience. Who knows?
Yeah. Don't forget your joy. Can't say it enough.
I've been invited to something on the weekend. I can't wait to talk about it next week. It's going to be so cool. I've been invited to a clinic thing this weekend. So I can't wait to talk about it next podcast.
Oh, got you. Go on.
Sorry, my brain fell out. With Rupert Isaacson. Have you heard of Rupert Isaacson?
I don't know him. Mm-mm.
The horse boy?
No.
Is that...
Oh,
He... Rupert Isaacson is an amazing human being. He has an autistic son who was completely non-verbal, and he travelled to many shamans in the world. So very spiritual. He enabled his son to become verbal, and it was very complicated, the whole situation. And I'll know more when I've spent some time with this amazing person. But on Sunday afternoon, I have been invited to a clinic all about finding our joy.
Oh, I love that.
And I'm so excited, so I will be able to tell you all about that. But if you're interested, you can look up Rupert Isaacson. I've actually never watched the film. He made a film about it.
Oh, wow.
It's not easy to find, with the amount of streaming services we have.
Yeah.
I've never actually found it, so I'm going to go and look for it again. But yeah, I'm so excited. I can't wait to tell you all about it. And
I can't wait.
Yeah, that's going to be really cool.
I think if I ever made merch, it would be don't forget your joy. You know how yours is like training every step? Mm-hmm. Mine would be much less academic. It would just be don't forget your joy.
I started...
And your coffee, perhaps.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say I tried to make a brand. I tried to make some clothing for a while that was like more like that, more like horse-centred. And one of them said, or maybe I won't give all my ideas away. No, I'm not going to tell everyone. But that sounds like a nice idea. Well, somebody might steal my idea.
On a t-shirt. Yeah, I'm just going to make a t-shirt that says don't forget your joy and don't forget your cake. That's it.
Perfect. Sounds great. I just want to take a moment to thank the second sponsor of our podcast, Redwings Horse Sanctuary. We are very excited to be going and visiting Redwings very soon, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be visiting one of their rehabilitation centres where they take in many of the needy horses and ponies in the UK and donkeys that require help and assistance, and in monthly donations and in one-off donations we can support them in the work that they do. Often the horses that come in need a lot of expert care. They need medical assistance where they have suffered from neglect or abuse before they were rescued. And so it is in our support that they can do the amazing work that they do. So if you feel like you can, then you can donate through the link in the show notes. Or if you don't feel like a monetary donation is possible, then please do head over to their social media, give some of their posts a like, give them a follow, maybe share it with some friends just to encourage people and spread the word, because often knowledge is the most important thing that we can do, is to spread the knowledge of what they're doing and how people can help. So thank you, Redwings. We really appreciate the opportunity of sponsorship of our podcast, and yes, we hope you guys will go and support them in return. So we are very excited to welcome Clare McLeod to our podcast today. Clare is an equine nutritionist, and I am really looking forward to this. I'm a real passionate equine nutritionist without any qualifications. And I'm only going on personal experience, so I'm really looking forward to asking her some questions and getting some actual facts from someone with a degree in the topic, so that we can really give you guys some proper good knowledge. And you've got some great questions, haven't you, Rhi?
I'm excited. And when we say we have searched high and low, far and wide, for an independent equine nutritionist who is qualified, we've really put in the work. So we're looking forward to it. I'm just interested. I'm staying with friends at the moment, and I was talking to them about this podcast and we were talking about how food is often overcomplicated, and I was saying, it's difficult at the moment because we're all hearing more fat, more fibre, less sugar, which all makes sense. But then if you're looking at the mainstream feed merchants on the market, it suddenly gets super complicated again, because you're like, well, I'm so used to feeding this and this, but they're saying this is bad and that is bad, and finding the options is hard. And so it starts to feel complicated even when it really shouldn't. So I've got questions around that, and then obviously questions around someone who's like dabbling with the idea of barefoot.
Welcome, Clare McLeod. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited about this.
Me too.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
So Clare, you are an equine nutritionist. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into what you're doing, and if it's relevant, what qualifications you have, I guess, so that people know that what you're saying is factually correct today?
That's a really good question, and I'm actually really glad you mentioned that, because I sometimes forget. Because I forget that sometimes horse owners aren't aware of the qualifications that are available to consider. But yes, first of all, I'm independent, so I tell the truth, which doesn't always go down that well in all spheres. But I'm really passionate about that, because it gives an avenue for owners to actually have an unbiased view and not be kind of brand specific. We've got some brilliant feed companies in the UK, and they do great work and they've got great feed lines, but my difference with what I do is I'm independent. So how did I get into this? Well, I'm a very academic person, but I love horses. I'm a very hands-on horse person as well. So I really wanted a career where I could do both, that I could do something quite academic, sciencey, but also very hands-on. I think nutrition's really good for that, because you do both. I love the rigorous science. I just find that really fascinating. Science can throw up more questions than answers, really, but it does give us that backbone, of evidence that we can base the best decisions for our horses on, which I think is really useful. In terms of qualifications, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's really important, because anyone can call themselves a nutritionist, but if you're looking for somebody with actual qualifications who has to prove their qualifications and carry on with their education, best thing is to look for a registered nutritionist. So I'm registered with the Association for Nutrition, which not a lot of horse owners are aware of, and that just gives you confidence that that person is properly qualified and is continuing to work on their experience and qualifications and knowledge, and also is accountable as well, because if you haven't got that, then so that's I think that's important.
I guess that's like a physio, for example. Do you have CPD days, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
That kind of okay. So it's like that continued growth that is so important.
Yes. Yeah, brilliant. I think so. Yeah.
Okay,
that's really interesting.
So we've already touched on we won't need to dive into it, but a thorny topic, which is that you're independent versus being aligned to a feed company. It's kind of like saddlers, isn't it? Sometimes saddlers they only shop or they only sell one particular brand, and that can be challenging. I guess to kick us off on that front, I think a lot of horse owners now have heard the rhetoric around we need more fibre, we need more fat, we need less sugar and starch. And that feels very simple as a baseline. But then when you start looking at what's available in the mainstream companies, and the trusted companies, to be honest, the ones that you feel like you can trust, it starts to get really complicated again, because you look at the ingredients and you're like, oh, but I don't know, is that too much starch or too little? So maybe we start at the baseline. What, as a horse owner, you're starting from scratch, you want to know more about nutrition, what are the things that we need to know?
Oh, that's such a good question, and I need to be able to answer it really quite concisely, because I could answer it in about a 2-hour monologue. Because you're right, it is. I mean, it's brilliant that we've got all that choice nowadays, and there's many different ways to feed well. So, it's much harder for me to answer that question, I think, nowadays than 20 years ago, when we had much simpler products available. So Yeah, it's not easy for horse owners to select, especially with the company's marketing getting much more clever, I think, nowadays. But ultimately, you're basically just looking to balance your horse's forage. So I would kind of round up nutrition, kind of stepping back almost from the feed companies and saying, look, these animals are designed to eat forage. That's not the right word, designed. They've evolved to survive on fibrous forage. So the way I see it is we need to choose the appropriate forage for their needs, if we can, because it's not always as easy as that to find the forage that suits your horse. But we need to ideally select the best type of forage, and then all we're doing with the bucket is balancing what's missing from that forage. So we can get as many nutrients as we can for our horses from the forage, and then literally just balance that with what's in the bucket. That is good nutrition. Now I know it's very much more nuanced and complex than that in the real life scenario.
No, but that's very helpful actually, just as a baseline. Yeah.
And obviously owners. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think that the problem is it's never made out to be that simple, is it? You know, the marketing is often, you know, I have a real bugbear with the marketing around things like ulcers, for example, you know, and they say ulcer, but spelt completely wrong, you know, ULSA or ULCA or something. And it's a marketing that's like, oh, it's for fixing this thing. And the reality is actually it's nothing, it's actually not actually any good in that, and it's the marketing that is the difficult thing for people to get around, because there's not that much information out there, like you're saying, about actually what is the simplest thing that we can start with, you know, because we're kind of bombarded with all of this other information up the top, you know, we're problem solving up here, and actually we need to be, I'm holding my hand above my head, we're not problem solving at the baseline, right? Because it's the baseline. And I think you and I really align on this, Claire, because I talk about nutrition a lot on my channel and page and to people that I help, because I believe it's such an important part of how, like, I think it's probably one of the most important things that we can do for our horses in terms of their well-being and behaviour. So, yeah, it's just...
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I kind of forget that sometimes, what you've just said there, because obviously it's my work and it's my passion and it's what I think about every minute of every day, really, because I'm so passionate about it. And I kind of forget that if an owner hasn't stopped to consider it, they could run into all sorts of challenges. Whereas I guess with the horses and the owners you're working with, you might come across a case where actually there's the big problem with their nutrition. I must admit, because I'm quite experienced and I've been doing this a long time, the owners that tend to come to work with me now usually have some background knowledge, or they've followed my work for a little while, so I'm not as, I suppose, exposed to the owners that really haven't thought about nutrition before as much.
I speak to people who are saying, I'm, you know, riding this horse and it's literally like an unexploded bomb, and then they tell me what they're feeding it, and I'm like, and they're really shocked that I tell them that the feed is one of the big problems, you know. And when I do problem solving, and I hope this maybe aligns, what I try and do is knock on the head as many things as I can that could be causing a problem. So one horse might be completely tolerant of a multi-ingredient feed and all of those things, and they might thrive on it, but then the other one, that it might not. And so because I don't have a crystal ball, it's generally a good thing, I find, to knock as many ingredients out and keep, like you're saying, take it back to that baseline to then go ahead from that. Does that sound like, is that some of the advice that you give? If somebody came to you and they weren't feeding good feed, what would be your go-to?
And I think that's a really good point you just made there. I'm going to just backtrack a little bit before I answer your question, in that you mentioned about horses being so different, and I think that's a really important factor. Like, again, without wanting to get into a big, huge, long story, when you learn about nutrition originally and you learn all the textbook stuff, you learn all the nutrient requirements, you learn all the biochemistry, you do get into this thing that, you know, horses need this and that's it. I think because I've had my own horses all those years as well, it's really helped me understand, and certainly as soon as you get into practice and you start actually dealing with real life cases, you realise they're all so different. And research is backing that up and showing us that now as the research builds and continues, and there's not enough of it going on, there really isn't. But from what we do know, it's just been confirmed that horses are so individual in what they respond well to and what they don't. It does make it a bit trickier for owners to work out what to go for, and that's why I've come up with this very basic framework that I talk about in all my programs and my consultations now, which is balance the forage in like 3 different ways. We've got like 3 different ways to balance the forage depending on the horse's energy and protein needs, to try and simplify it down, because you're right, they're all so different, and what works for one might not work for another, and then they'll change because, especially in the UK, we've got this thing called grass, which varies widely.
Oh, I can't wait to talk about grass.
Which yard you're on, what time of year it is, what the sun's doing, what the rain's doing. So that's a completely unpredictable part of your horse's diet, unlike if you have a dog or a cat where your cat might eat birds or mice or whatever, but you can generally control their diet, whereas with horses, you've got actually a lot less control on the majority part of their diet.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this now a couple of times. You've brought up this idea of balancing the forage. So as a everyday horse owner, let's say, just for simplicity's sake, that there's nothing major going wrong. It's just Harley, for example. Harley is a 7-year-old Irish draft. He's looking great. Everything's fine. There's no behavioural challenges. When we say balancing the forage, are we testing our hay and grass, or are we talking about something more simple than that? What does that look like for you at the start of a case?
He's a very handsome horse. Is he the chestnut that's in your picture?
Yes,
He's
he
lovely.
is. Thank you.
I think to kind of really simplify, because actually nutrition is an incredibly complex subject when you start getting into actually all the biochemistry and the physiology of it. So to really just, I suppose, get it down to that basic level of what do we mean when we say balanced forage? What do we feed? How I try and outline it is saying, well, forage is generally missing certain nutrients. Yes, there will be some variation in that, but generally grass forage, which includes your grass, your hay, your haylage, even to some extent straw if you feed that, it's more commonly fed nowadays, they'll all be missing similar sort of nutrients. So you might not have to analyse your forage, and as long as you're using a well-formulated product to balance it, that's going to cover a wide range of different forages. There's this myth that you have to analyse your forage and then make a bespoke product. That can actually be quite harmful because forage will change. We've just talked about that with grass. So I like to say, look, again, without wanting to give you a huge big lecture about all the different nutrients, if you balance your forage by either, number one, a vitamin and mineral supplement, if the horse doesn't actually need any extra calories or energy or protein, if your forage supplies all they need on that side of things and they're maintaining weight, performance, you're just going to need vitamins and minerals. Then if they need a bit more, they're in hard work or you're not sure about the forage quality, you might use what we call a balancer in the trade. I mean, it's not a great term because everything is a balancer, but it's like a concentrated feed that's a vitamin and mineral supplement with some extra protein and calories or energy in it. And then if they need even more than that because they're going to be losing weight or they're not performing, they're in hard work or they're a broodmare or an older horse that can't eat forage very well, then we'd be moving into what we would traditionally call a concentrate feed. Now that can be either a compound or straights. You've got a huge wide choice.
Can you explain a bit about compounds and straights, just if somebody doesn't totally know what that means?
Yes, I know I use the word compound feed a lot, but of course some horse owners won't know exactly what that means because that's coming from the feed industry terminology. So a compound, when we use the term compound feed, it just means a feed made from a mix of ingredients that is specifically put together to balance forage. That's it really. So some owners will think of a pellet or a nut as a compound feed, but that could also include like a chopped grass with some extra nutrients in it. It's anything that's made from a mix of ingredients that balances forage. If you're using straights for your number 2 or number 3 of my 3 options, you've got to be very, very careful. It's quite interesting because 20 years ago, I started in this subject at 28, it was a long time ago, 100 years ago. Horse owners generally knew that you had to balance straights back then, if you fed oats.
And straights are single ingredients?
Sorry, single ingredients. I didn't answer that question very well, did I?
Can you give us an example of what a straight would be?
So straights would be any single ingredient from oats, cereal grains like oats, barley, not so commonly fed nowadays, linseed, coconut or copra meal, bran, sugar beet pulp,
so making your own compound, essentially using straights. Okay, got it.
Exactly. So, I say, 20 years ago, owners kind of had an idea that if you fed straights, you had to balance them. What's happened now is that a lot of owners are going away from compound feeds because they've listened to stories or they become sceptical, or maybe they have a horse that doesn't suit them because, like you said, Miri, there's the odd horse that they don't suit. But you've got to know what you're doing because if you feed straights and you don't balance them correctly, you can do a whole load of harm. And it's interesting because I've never, in the first 10, 15 years of my career, I probably could count on one hand how many sort of deficient diets I came across. In the last couple of years, I've come across loads more where owners have good intentions and they're trying to feed their horses well, but they don't actually know how to balance straights, and they've ended up with a really unbalanced diet. So that's the beauty about the compound feed that's in the packet. If it's from a reputable company, you know it's going to balance your forage correctly. Whereas if you're feeding straights, whether it's forage concentrates like alfalfa pellets or grass chaff or, I don't know, sugar beet pulp, or you're adding linseed, you really need to know how to balance those straights. Yeah.
And so if you were to feed some amount of straight feed and a mineral balancer, is that a good way of doing things?
Yes, you certainly can do that, as long as your horse is having enough grass, because you've got to be a bit careful if you have a horse that's on restricted grass, or you're in, say, winter and you haven't got much turnout in your livery yard, and then you could end up being short of vitamins. It does get quite complicated.
Even if they're having the mineral balancer, like a mineral, supplementation
mixture. Yeah, you can get vitamin and mineral mixtures, but you can also get just mineral mixtures. So if you're feeding that broad spectrum vitamin and mineral, then you're likely to be okay. So as long as you're feeding that with if you want to use straights as concentrates, then you're generally okay. But you do need to feed those vitamins and minerals. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fine.
Gosh, it's quite complicated, isn't it? I think for the average horse owner, because I can understand, I think it's been a human trend as well that people have moved away from, I'm going to say, ultra processed food towards individual ingredients and trying to reduce their ingredient list, which is easier, I think, for a human maybe than for us, for our horses, which I think is the equivalent maybe. But for the average horse owner, who's maybe not comfortable with mixing their own straights and trying to get the balance, are there specific things that you would be like, just be aware of this and this, be aware of either this language or this ingredient, just little things if we're looking at compounds, for example?
It's a great subject and it's not talked about enough. There's a lot of misunderstanding with it. Like, just to backtrack what you said there about like highly processed food, we are learning in human nutrition that maybe too much intake of ultra processed food isn't good. What a surprise, not. It's not really rocket science. The thing is, horse compound feeds are nothing like a human ultra-processed food.
Yes.
Like, maybe 20 years ago when they started making heavily molasses course mixes for really hard-working horses, they probably might be slight equivalent in terms of they'd be very high in sugar, but then they were designed for hard-working horses that actually might well need some starch and sugar. So that's slightly different. But the kind of compound feeds that you get nowadays that are balanced, and there's a lot more nutrients coming out of fibre and oil rather than starchy grains, because so many horses don't need that, they are nothing like human ultra-processed food. It's not comparable. It's a very different thing. They're not high in sugar. The highest sugar feed that we give our horses is grass and hay. Much higher in sugar generally than most of the bags compound feeds, because most horses don't need masses of sugar. So I've gone off down a rabbit hole, but it's an interesting area because it's easy to sort of extrapolate out of the human side of things, but we have to be careful when we do that we don't miss a big step, because, as I say, the compound feeds is an easier solution for owners, and most horses actually do really well on them. Yes, if you've got a leisure horse and the owner's piling in a mix which has a load of barley or whatever in it, and the horse really doesn't need that, that could well be an issue. But we have these really lovely low starch pelleted balancers that are a really useful way of balancing forage. And we have some great vitamin and mineral supplements if they don't need any of the extra ingredients that we can use with something straight like a grass chaff or a grass nut or something. I mean, in terms of watching out for compounds that might not be so useful, the thing is, there are really, really strict rules about what you can put in horse feed. And actually much stricter than a lot of owners realise. Again, I don't want to kind of make a big lecture of it, because as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about my subject. I can talk about it for hours.
No, but you know what? I mean, just to give you the confidence, Claire, like, yes, we're going down rabbit holes, but I actually personally am finding this quite comforting, because I do think recently a lot of owners, you hear a lot of not scaremongering, that's probably a bit of a strong word, but around like sugar and starch and you can't trust the packaged feeds, and like there's a lot of that conversation, and I think it's all good, but it puts owners in a really difficult position, because as you said, a lot of owners can't do the balancing themselves or don't feel confident, and then they're left feeling like they can't feed anything, and that also isn't a good position to be in. So I think it's rabbit holes, but it's actually quite good, I think, for you to explore this topic.
the thing is, there are strict rules about manufacture of horse feed. And if you're really concerned about it, I'd say go visit a mill, and you'll probably be quite surprised, because a lot of what you read online, a lot of the stories about, feed manufacturers withholding information and doing these unhealthy feeds, is all myth, and it's just not understanding the full process. There are really strict rules. Like, there's a list of additives you can use. You can't just use what you want when you make horse feed or supplements. There's very strict rules about what can go in there, what levels can go in there. There's very strict rules about how they're labelled, and I think a lot of horse owners don't realise this. And a lot of the pressure about compounds being bad or processed feeds being bad, apart from maybe coming from the human side of putting ultra-processed feeds alongside horse compounds, apart from that, we've had an influx of companies who are selling more natural products.
Yes.
Kind of in inverted commas, because what does that mean? And their marketing has been very, I would say, kind of slightly inflammatory, and really making horse owners worry about more traditional feeds unnecessarily, but it's to push their own products. So you have to be a bit careful with that. I'm not saying that, we should all, if we've been feeding our horse a good diet and it's based on straights and we're happy with it, we better not, we'll go for compounds. What I'm saying is there's many different ways to feed well. All we need to do is give that balanced diet. How we do that is another question, if that makes sense.
I think maybe it's a good moment to ask, how do you feed your own horses? What do you feed them? Like, is there...
Good question.
Because
Yeah, they do get experimented on from time to time. I mean, I work with so many owners that I can get, obviously we've got very limited evidence, unfortunately, in horse nutrition to work from, which is a bit frustrating when you're a practitioner who's trying to give evidence-based advice, and the evidence just isn't there because no one's done the research. So I do experiment on my horses with certain supplements from time to time, but in terms of their basic feed, it literally is simply trying to give them the appropriate forage for them, so I can give them enough to eat, as in not too high in calorie if they're both good doers, my current horses, and then balancing that forage, usually with a vitamin and mineral supplement, and then I'll incorporate a balancer during the winter. One drops weight a bit or one's working a bit harder. Sometimes I'll even just use half and half. I am perfectly comfortable with the good company pelleted balancers that are fed at, the 100 grams per 100 kilo body weight. They're fed like a jug full per day. I've had so many horses have good results with them, barefoot, shod, metabolic. If they're fed as part of a balanced diet, I've had great success with these products. So I use them myself quite happily. The main
Are you allowed
thing
to
is
share your favourite brands, or is that...
brands, yeah. No, that's absolutely fine. Well, the thing is, it's a good question, and I have to talk brands, because ultimately, when I'm helping a horse owner, I've got to tell them which products to feed. There's no point in me saying, go and find something with 1,000 IUs of vitamin E in it, and sending them off on their way. Some of my content might tell you about the levels to look for, but in terms of brands, in terms of actual balancers, so good ones would include the Spillers, and some people might be surprised at some of these brands, but they're good quality feeds. Spillers, Bailey's, Saracen, Thunderbrook, they do a slightly different type of balancer, which is a bit higher in calories, but it is a natural alternative if you want something that isn't pelleted. What other companies for balancers? The blue chip one specs are better than they were now. I think they haven't been added to my list. I've just looked at Again one. Most of the balancers are pretty good actually. And they don't use any nasty fillers or binders. That's a myth. You're not allowed to use any nasties in horse feed manufacture nowadays. I don't have an issue with any of the ingredients that are used in all these type of feeds, I must say.
What's your take on soya in horse feed?
Yeah, that's a good question. How long do we want to talk about that?
Can I say why I say that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have worked with lots of I think I come at it from a very different place, maybe because like you were saying, you're coming at it from, you've got people who are coming to you who have a bit of an informed position potentially some of the time.
Yeah,
I'm often helping people who are working their horse is really, really dysfunctional, and it's very problematic. It's it's chronic in certain cases, anxiety, behavioural issues, pain in the body, ulcers, whatever it might be. And so things like, I'll have somebody come to me and they'll tell me the diet, for example, and I'll discuss it with them. And like I always give, say, look, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm just basing my advice on experience, basically. And sometimes these diets are, you know, they're feeding three different feeds, for example, and all three of them contain soya. And soya is often the first thing on the list. Now, I'm pretty sure, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the ratio of ingredients are listed in highest volume first. So like some of these balancers, not one of them is not on your list actually, and this is the one that often I won't name it, but the first thing on the first ingredient is soya, and then the other thing that they're feeding is also got soya, and then it's this and then it's that. And I'm interested because often we'll cut that out of those feeds out of the diet, and the horse improves, and quite consistently, you know, the inflammation goes down. What's your experience on that?
I giggled about soya because there is such raging debates about it. And I think that the benefit I bring to the table, I guess, is experience of working with an awful lot of horses over the years. And although I say, you know, I have maybe more nowadays, maybe more kind of people further along in their nutrition journey, maybe because of what I charge nowadays. Over the years, I've worked with all sorts of cases, and also I do have a lot of clinical cases, or cases where the owner is having a lot of problems and they'll come to me. I don't have a problem with soya if it's fed as part of a balanced diet. That's the really key factor. Like if you're dealing with a horse and they're having 3 different products and they're being fed too much, that's a common thing. Owners want their horses to look good, so they might overfeed. Or they're feeding something which actually just doesn't agree with that horse, which is a possibility. Then yeah, absolutely, taking that out, you might see a difference. The big problem we have with nutrition is when we have a problem with our horse and we finally decide to make some changes to look for a solution, we usually do more than one thing at once. This is the classic trouble. So what is it that's actually causing that benefit? And I can see why owners often do get put off certain types of feed, because they might have taken that feed out at the same time as they've made some other changes that could have also had a dramatic effect on that horse. We have plenty of research. The thing is, we actually have plenty of research for some of the ingredients like sugar beet and soya and bran, wheat bran, because they've been around as animal feed ingredients for years, and there is actually quite a bit of research into them. So we have more information on them than a lot of horse owners think. And on top of that, if you look at the so-called inflammatory effects of soya, that comes from like rodent studies. And I mean, I've looked into this in great depth because I know that it does concern some horse owners. And they've come from like rodent studies and other studies where you're feeding amounts of soya that you would not find in horse feed, unless somebody was literally feeding 4 or 5 kilos of something inappropriate to a horse per day. But the reason you'll see soya in feeds, and this is again often maybe missed, it is by far, without any doubt, the best source of essential amino acids or good quality protein for horses, bar none. Vegetable, if we're talking about a vegetarian diet. Absolutely bar none. That's why you'll see soya in these feeds like stud balancers or performance balancers or build-up type of feeds, because it is an amazing source of protein. It's not the only place you can get protein, so if you want to leave it out, yeah, absolutely, you can feed a balanced diet without it, definitely. But it is actually a useful ingredient, and I've worked with so many thousands of owners or thousands of horses whose owners are feeding these type of products and not having any trouble at all. So therefore, because of that, I'm just not convinced that it's as bad as a lot of horse owners might think. But I'm not saying there's not the odd horse that probably will do better off some of these ingredients, because just like people, like I can't eat prawns. I'm really allergic to prawns. That's not to say prawns are bad. I mean, they're a really good source of protein, if you're not a vegetarian, obviously. But they make me really ill. So there are obviously going to be cases, I think, like that with horses. But yeah, I think sometimes it's difficult to work out exactly which change it was that had the benefit that you're seeing, potentially.
Of course, yeah, being scientific is important, isn't it? You're changing one thing at a time, otherwise you're never going to know what you're... Changing your variables one at a time is important, right? We all learned that at school.
But it's very difficult in practice when you've got a big problem, isn't it? You want to change several things.
God, yeah. When you speak to people and they're like, oh, I never turn my horse out and I'm feeding it all of this stuff and it keeps bucking me off and the saddle doesn't fit and it's got wolf teeth and da-da-da-da-da.
And you're not going to wait and be like, okay, we'll do this one at a time. Like, no. So,
exactly.
I mean, I'm getting the impression that for you, it's not one thing, it's not one size fits all, and every horse is different. with that in mind, is there any ingredient that you're like, everything else I've said, balance and, thinking about it, but however, this ingredient I really would avoid for all horses of this species? That doesn't make sense. All of these animals.
Yeah. So I was nodding, for those listening and not watching, I was nodding fervently when Rhi was saying about them being very individual and it's not one size fits all. And I'm not just saying that because I want to sell my nutritionist services. I promise. It really is true. They're so different. And I mean, Miri, you'll appreciate that entirely because you work with lots of different horses and you've already alluded to it, that they're all, quite individual. But in terms of an ingredient that I probably wouldn't ever have in a feed room, that's a good question, actually. I think probably barley. Like, I don't think barley's particularly bad. I just don't see it as much good. Like, we've got much better ingredients for horses. I don't often recommend cereal grains these days, apart from if I'm working with the elite performance horses, that actually some of them do benefit. That's a big long story in that. But like, if you are going to feed your horse cereals, oats are the best choice by far. They're the highest fibres, the most digestible starch, lowest energy. There's a whole list of reasons why they're better. So that I think we've got much better ways of putting condition on and getting calories than the old-fashioned barley rings that are still available, actually. So I don't think I've recommended barley in the last 10 years. Yeah.
Wow, 10 years, that's a lot. Yeah.
I remember I had terrible trouble with this young horse and I was suggested to feed her barley rings. I was only 16 and I think back and I think, God, wonder how many horses I would have mended by not feeding them a load of rubbish that I was being suggested at the time.
Well, I used to work, when I was a teenager, I worked on a hunt yard in the winter, and I'm sure it was barley. I'll have to ask my friend. That it was like warm, and when they'd come back from a day's hunting, it would be in this like big pot, and obviously it would have been, I don't know.
That might be bran
cooking.
mash.
I don't know.
There might have been barley rings, yeah. But can I just interject here?
Grey?
Yeah, what colour?
Kind of grey.
Yeah, that might have been barley rings. They look like giant Wheatos.
Yeah, that's right. Right. It was barley. Yeah, and it just smelt so good, and you felt so good giving it to them because it was all warm and like really cozy.
But I will interject.
This is not a good ad for barley. And it was about 10 years ago.
But I'm interrupting you a little bit, but you mentioned something so important then, so I don't want to forget about it. You mentioned that you used to work in a hunt yard, if I'm recalling correctly what you said, and you mentioned that these horses worked really, really hard and they were coming back in. What we do have to remember is when we're trying to select feeds and we're trying to feed our horses well, we have to put it in context. Like, and this is what I see working as a nutritionist because I see such a wide range of cases, thousands. And you have to remember, I think, or we have to remember, it's easy to forget, that how you're going to be feeding a horse in that situation is going to be very different to feeding your general leisure or kind of amateur competition horse. Because if you've got a seriously dehydrated and tired horse, actually tempting them to eat anything is really important. So an inappetite horse, it might not be that, we've laughed about barley, it might not be appropriate to feed barley to most of the horses that we all deal with. But actually, if you need something that's very tempting and very appetising and easy to eat and easy to digest, as long as you're not overfeeding it in one meal, that's the dangerous thing about starch. You've got to be very careful you don't overfeed it per meal. They digest starch very well, but just in limited quantities. Then actually something like that can be quite useful. So I think we have to be careful not coming up with rules that apply to every horse. And I run into this a little bit out in practice where an owner's had native ponies all their life, or native crosses and that sort of thing, and then they end up with an off-the-track thoroughbred, like an ex-racehorse, and they're trying to feed that horse in the same way, and they can run into an awful lot of problems because you have to really adapt to that horse that's in front of you in that situation. So it was a really interesting point you made there about feeding these tired hunters, and that might actually have been quite an appropriate way to tempt them to eat something.
Yeah, it's nice. Well, one thing I've been desperate to ask you since we've been waiting for this interview is something that's quite a hot topic at the moment, which is going barefoot. And I'm just a normal horse owner. I've only ever had 2 horses, but I've ridden my whole life, and they've all had shoes. And I'm sort of exploring the possibility of taking my horse barefoot in the autumn. Chatted with my farrier, had chats with Miri and other people about it, and they all say 3 months or so before you take the shoes off, make sure you're getting the nutrition right, because actually that's a huge part of making healthy hooves. And beyond a couple of conversations with Miri, everyone's like, just make sure you get the nutrition right. And like, you're sort of sat there like, what does that mean? And you try to Google it and you're like, is it biotin? Is it just having a balance of vitamins and minerals? And again, you can start to become quite overwhelmed by the, I say advice in air quotes because, you know, it's Facebook groups and things. So if you had a client coming to you who wanted to take a horse barefoot, where would you start?
Yeah, great. That's a great question, isn't it? And it is quite topical. And it's lovely that it's becoming a lot more popular. It's quite funny because I grew up in, a little bit of backstory before I comment or answer your question. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. We didn't have a road to the house. It was a bit unusual. And my first couple of ponies I had didn't have shoes because the nearest farrier was about 80 miles away. And we didn't have any roads. And my dad used to trim their feet quite successfully. Had great feet. But anyway, aside from that, when I moved to England, because that was in the north of Scotland, when I moved to England into civilization, it kind of surprised me that all horses just had shoes on. And like for me, you only put shoes on if your horses needed them.
Yeah.
And that's just maybe coming from a slightly ignorant background, you could say. But I've actually taken on that whole. I'm not answering your question yet, but I will get to your answer in just a second. So I've kind of lived with that way of looking at foot protection, as in our horses have wonderful feet, and then you only do anything with them if they need it, rather than just saying, my horse is coming to work, I'm going to shoe it. And so I'm delighted that nowadays that attitude is becoming more popular. Like, here's my horse's feet, this is how they're meant to be, and then am I going to add anything to them or not? But anyway, so I've always been, I suppose, maybe a bit more open-minded than others about this whole thing. And I've had my own horse as an adult for about 23 years now. I had a little period of academic study where I didn't actually have my own one. And so I've played around with all sorts of foot care and probably had more years of more bare feet than shod. But I've done all sorts of different things with them. In terms of the diet, to actually get to the answer to your question, absolutely, nutrition I think is key, very important. So are other things, so are other factors just as important. But what I would say is, personally, I don't think you should be feeding your barefoot horse any different. And that might sound really odd. That might sound quite unusual.
No, I guess, yeah.
But I think that depends on
balancing it.
Depends what you're feeding to start with, right?
Yeah. Exactly. We should be feeding all our horses well, regardless of what they've got on their feet. And I think that shoes can cover up a multitude of sins. I think that's why we've had this big kind of explosion of bare feet horses being fed differently or managed differently, because possibly all that's happening is that's how the shod horse should have been fed and managed.
Right.
If you see what I mean. So I know it's a bit of an odd, and I'm not just saying this to be controversial and get engagement or whatever. I'm not into that. I'm too old in the tooth for that.
You old clickbaiter, Claire.
It's just, to me, it's logical. Like, you just feed them well anyway, and they should have good feet. And if you happen to put shoes on for whatever reason, great. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, with the barefoot horse, you can't get away with some of the stuff that you might if you're covering up their feet with shoes. But in terms of what's important, exactly the same. A really well-balanced diet, all the right levels of minerals, not too much water-soluble carbs, sugar, fructan from the grass, not too much starch. Just a really well-balanced diet with appropriate amounts of everything. Yeah.
And if I mean, in terms of, like, would it be interesting to hear what you're feeding Harley now, Rhi, in terms of whether Claire thinks that is a balanced diet or not? I mean, is that, we can cut this out.
Oh gosh, this is real on the spot, isn't it? Imagine if I say and she's like, "That's terrible."
No, so change it and we cut this out and it's fine.
So for context, Claire, so I keep Harley on full livery with my coach, and so I'll give you a view into his sort of management. So he lives out overnight all year round, and then he's in during the day, and he has ad lib hay in the day. He might have a tiny bit of haylage in the winter, but he basically lives on air, so he looks really well all the time. He gets a feed in the morning, and then that's it. He gets like a handful of chaff and a handful of nuts. The chaff is Dengi. I think it might be Hi-Fi, but I'm not 100% sure because, as I said, I don't feed him myself. I'm sure it's Dengi. And then the nuts are just like pony. I think they're just like grass nuts from our local feed merchant. They're not like big branded. And then he's also on 2 supplements. One is like a gut supplement just to make sure that that's taken care of and looked after. And then he's on a supplement just to support joints. And that's it. That is what he eats, basically.
Yeah. That's quite a kind of regular horse diet. So if I was if you were coming to me and you were saying, right, sort my horse's diet out, first of all I'd say, well, is he maintaining weight and condition?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that tells us, that he's having enough calories, or digestible energy is the proper word, but calories makes us think more about condition really than energy. So yeah, if that's correct, then that's a tick in the box. But what I would say from just having that information about his diet is that he's going to be short of minerals and potentially vitamins, especially in the winter. So the chaff and pony nuts he gets, if it's just a small amount, they're literally just a carrier for the supplements. They're not going to be really contributing any nutrients. So he'd be a good candidate for just a really good broad spectrum vitamin mineral supplement.
So would that come in the form, for you, if you were doing it, would that be like, oh, I'm going to make myself sound super ignorant, but that's what this podcast is for. Would that come in the form of a balancer? Would it come in the form of like a literal supplement where it's like a little tiny scoop of something? I'm just trying to picture it for the people who are also picturing this.
If you go right back to this idea that I had of the 3 different groups of what you'd feed, for him, if he's maintaining weight, given his breed, I mean, if I was doing a proper consultation, I'd have to spend a lot more time getting a lot more history. I would just put that in the caveat. That if he's maintaining condition, you're happy with his performance, his health signs are good, you know that your hay quality is pretty good, he's getting kind of well-managed grass, then you're literally talking about a vitamin and mineral supplement, a powder, or pelleted. Some of them are pelleted. So you probably wouldn't even need a balancer for a horse like him. Like I say, if we wanted to be sure, obviously I'd need a lot more information about him and what to do with him, what work he does. But just on a basic level, just a vitamin and mineral powder. And I've got, there's a variety on the market. Some of them are good, some of them aren't. Surprisingly, there's some feed companies who sell products that don't balance forage very well. I don't know why, it doesn't seem to make sense, because there's plenty of information on what typical forage contains. But yeah, I've got lists, and I've got free lists for owners that they can download from my website, which just gives a list of the products that I recommend, because it's really important.
I'll be downloading that.
Yeah.
But that's such a good little experiment thing that we did there. I'm so glad I forced it upon you both.
Yeah, well, do you know what? So many people will feed chaff and pony nuts because it's such a default, easy pan, especially with
it's very palatable
with a breed. Yeah, and a lot of people have good doers like drafts, like Harley. You know, he is a draft, and a lot of people have those types of horses over. Actually, a lot of people probably have X races, but beyond that, you're more likely to have a hardy, native-y type breed, I imagine, in the everyday population than you are like a warm blood. But go on, sorry, Miri.
No, I think that was it. I just said it. I think it was a really good experiment and exercise to do, because I think that is what people will be like, okay, well, where does this leave me? And actually what we just went through, like, what are you feeding? What do you need to add? What do you need to reduce? Is really important, because you're not feeding something hugely complex. You're feeding few number of ingredients. He's doing really well. Nothing huge needs to change, but especially if you're thinking about taking the shoes off, you're going to need to rely on the foot properties having maybe a bit more integrity to them, which is what we're talking about, the shoes covering them up. You need to add in some vitamins and minerals. You can now look into what that's going to look like. And I think a lot of people will probably be in that similar position. Yeah. Like, they're looking at their horse and they're thinking, he looks pretty good, everything looks fine. Does sometimes, nothing's really wrong. Like, I think I have a bit of a tainted opinion on it all, because people are coming to me like, oh God, no, I'm having a terrible time. So it's a bit dramatised almost, but it's so nice to be able to speak to the everyday and say, what is, what can we do? What can we all be doing that's slightly better? You mentioned that there was another feed that you mentioned that sometimes gets a bit of bad rep, and that is sugar beet. Well, speed.
I was like, which one?
Right. Because it has historically had a bit of a negative connotation to it, right? Because it's called sugar beet. But actually, the reality of it in the format that we often feed it now, which is more micronized, as in more processed, is pretty okay. Or do you say that's quite a generically good thing to add to horses' feed? I don't really know where that was coming from, but...
No, I thought you were going to say alfalfa. I thought we were going to have the great
alfalfa. Oh, well, we can talk about that too if you like. Me and Scratchy Alfalfa, we have a
Scratch off. I mean, the one thing I would just backtrack. I really need about 4 hours to speak to you both because you've got some great questions, and
we can do episode 2, Claire. Don't worry, we can come back another day.
If audience who are listening, friend on the phone, if you have additional questions that you're like, why aren't they answering this? Why aren't they asking that? Send them in, and we'll do a part 2. We'll bring Claire back. Carry on, Claire. Sorry.
Oh no, lovely. I love questions. They're really important because it helps me understand what horse owners want to find out about. But just to backtrack before I answer the sugar beet thing, I was just going to say, like, alluding back to what you said earlier, Miri, about you have these horses come in and there's lots of problems and they're having 3 different feeds. Like, a lot of these owners will be overfeeding because I think a lot of owners forget. Yeah, just nutrients the horse doesn't need, and that's not helpful. I'm going to answer your question in a minute. But I think that's worth a mention because, like, it's all very well me saying, all these feeds are great, blah, 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 blah. But in context, we have to remember, that sounds very dictatorial. I think it's helpful to remember, it's my age showing, I think it's helpful to remember, and there's some Nutribaloney about this flying about online, that horses can extract a tremendous amount of nutrients from forage. And I think that's forgotten sometimes. And obviously, there's less margin, less money made from forage, by farmers than there is bagged feed. There's less marketing into it. So we forget sometimes just how much horses can extract from forage. And if we get the forage right, we might actually be able to feed a lot less. And, owners are obviously, they have a lot more information on the bags and the packets about the feed and the balancers and that sort of thing. Whereas often they don't have the choice about the forage, never mind the information about it. So I think that sometimes it's a bit of a kind of forgotten factor, but it's usually the majority of the diet and should be the majority of the diet. So I've got a little bit of a sidetrack on there, but I thought that was important to mention.
So I guess what you're saying is just to maybe simplify it, is, as just what I've understood of it, is those feeds that are maybe more complex, that have multiple ingredients, like a compound feed, they are okay, but you are likely to not need very much.
It depends.
Of course, it depends on the horse, but to your everyday horse, if you're using them as your mineral vitamin supplementation, the volume that you need to get to that balance is probably less than you might think. How do you work that out?
I'm laughing because in my live session with all of my horse owners that are on the nutrition program with me, and we had such a laugh about it because, like, the answer they hate me to say is it depends, but that's actually the right answer. It's such an annoying answer, it depends, but it really does. Going right back to what we said about horses being individuals, this is a thing that I think a lot of owners get into trouble with, is that they have these natives, they have these good doers, these horses that don't need much feed, or they've got good quality hay, and then they have a different horse, or they move yard, or we run out of grass, and suddenly their horse has lost weight and it's too thin and they're not sure what to do because they're just not used to feeding a quantity. So the actual amount that horse needs is entirely dependent on their individual circumstances. Like, I've just been working with an elite endurance horse, and this horse struggled to maintain appetite. And, I've been saying to this owner, you need to feed literally as much as the horse will eat. Just open a sack of compound feed and let it eat. That's a slight exaggeration of the situation.
Don't take that. Don't take
it completely literally. But we do have compound feeds nowadays that are actually getting most of the nutrients from fibre and oil sources and a lot less from grain. So they are much safer to feed in very large quantities. So you might have to feed one of these feeds at 4 or 5 kilos a day for a 500 kilo horse. But you might also, like Rhi's horse, not ever need to feed one of these feeds. So it really does depend on the situation in that individual horse. And their energy requirements, their calorie requirements are so variable. You start with, I'm pointing over there because that's where my textbooks are. You start with textbook values for energy, and then you go and work in the field in real life, and you might as well burn all the energy requirements. They're still trying to work, the researchers are still working on energy requirements, and they're so different with individual horses. But we should get back to the sugar beet question, shouldn't we? The sugar beet, soya, sugar beet, alfalfa, they're all a bit like Marmite. There's a lot of owners that feed them and are happy with them. There's a lot of owners that wouldn't touch them with a barge pole. So yeah, sugar beet, you're right. In the old days, sugar beet generally was molasses sugar beet shreds or pellets, and that was sugar beet with sugar added back in. But what's worth remembering is that, like, most of the sugar beet we have available nowadays, including Speedy Beet, and there's loads of other ones, Quick Beet, Simple Systems, Pure Beet, they're all basically the root with the sugar taken out.
Yeah,
So
they're just the fibre.
Yeah, so you end up with like 5% sugar-ish, which is, in terms of human diet definition, very low. So it's the beet, the root, which is very high in fibre with the sugar taken out. The beauty about sugar beet is that it's high in soluble fibre and pectin. And there's just research just emerging, although some of it's funded by the company, so we have to bear that in mind, that it could actually be very helpful for horses prone to stomach ulcers and stomach lesions and ulcers because of that high pectin soluble fibre level. And the other beauty with it is it does soak up a tremendous volume of water. I mean, I'm telling you what you already know here. But it does soak up a tremendous volume of water, more so than anything else. So it ends up being
5
the lowest
times.
calorie mash. There you go, yeah. So basically that means it ends up being the lowest calorie mash. If you have a really overweight horse or pony that you've got to get vitamins and minerals into, and they won't eat a straw-based chaff, you don't want to feed them anything with any more calories in it, the unmolasses soaked sugar beet is great because actually the calories per mugful are very, very low once it's been soaked.
We feed it as lunchtime snack. So at the moment when they're in and the grass is a bit not great because we've not had any rain, I want to talk about grass, but we feed a bit of speedy beet just on its own and they love it.
Yeah.
And it's really nice because it helps that gut motility. I'm a real speedy beet advocate, having fed it for many years. And I now am very fortunate to work with British Horse Feeds to spread the word, essentially. But yeah, I'm glad that you agree as such that it is a good versatile option because I think it gets a bad rep because it's cool. People are like, oh, it's sugar. It's not.
No, it's not. It's low in sugar.
No. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you...
Sorry. Can I add one thing about sugar beet before we go on to this?
You go.
I would love to add one thing about sugar beet before then I'll come back to your forage question, Rhi. As you can tell, I'm quite passionate about my subject, sometimes a bit too much. And that is, like, I think it also gets a little bit of a bad rap about being processed. Yes, it is processed. Obviously, it's the residue that's left after the sugar has been extracted. But I've studied this in great depth as well. And there are lots, and British Horse Feeds will you'll know this from working with British Horse Feeds, I'm sure, Miri. They're very careful controls about what ends up in the animal food chain. So when we talk about, byproducts are bad, byproducts from the human industry are bad, that's just not true. That's a myth because there's strict controls about what horse feed can, include or what it can contain. So just because something has come out of the human food industry doesn't mean to say it's bad. And I think that definitely applies to your sugar beet. It's perfectly safe for horses even though it's come out of the human food industry.
So this might be a really dumb question, which is why I'm going to ask it for anybody else who's wondering.
Questions. No such thing.
No silly questions. Yeah.
So for those people who are in the position on yards where their turnout is reduced in the winter and therefore their horse is eating less grass and more hay as their forage base, and knowing that forage is making up the majority of what horses are eating, is there anything we need to look out for with... I guess, is there anything we're losing by moving from grass to more hay? Or is it like almost the same makeup when we're thinking about feed for the winter, for example, with that in mind?
It's kind of interesting that you said this might be a silly question. That's probably one of the best questions I've had in the past 4 weeks.
That's the validation I live for, Claire.
But it's such a brilliant question, and the reason I think it's such a good question is because so many horse owners haven't stopped to think about it. And
I love
it's
this.
it is a good question. So there's two big differences between your grass and your hay, and the first one is vitamins. When we make hay or haylage, we lose the vitamins out of the grass, no matter how well it's made, no matter how much sun we've had. Well, actually, you get good vitamin D. What I should clarify is that it's always low in vitamins E and A. So no matter how quickly it's been dried, and no matter how well it's stored, it's still going to be short of vitamins for horses. So when you've got no grass in the diet, either that's because it's winter and they're in, or they're on a grass-free track system type of setup, or a dry lot as they call it in some countries, then you have to make sure that you're getting the vitamins A and E in. And some vitamin mineral products don't contain those, so you've got to be quite careful with that. So that's a really good point. If you're feeding one of these good broad spectrum ones, you don't need to worry about it because they'll have enough in, generally, for most horses. And then the other factor, of course, is the moisture. So most grass will be, spring grass, about 80% water. Some of it might be a bit less than that, which means that you're obviously putting them on a much drier diet. which is okay. Horses seem to survive on that as long as they drink plenty. But that's when actually feeding things like soaked sugar beet or actually soaking some of your hay can be quite useful just to increase that water or fluid intake. And the key factor with what you've just said is doing that gradually, because the risk of colic, a lot of owners have read in pony club manuals or whatever that, you know, we should change your horse's feed gradually because it's good for their gut. But sometimes what owners forget is that includes the forage. So changing them from a grass-based diet, and it can be really tricky in livery yards practically, but changing them from that grass-based diet to only hay should ideally always be done gradually, even if you have to buy a big sack of grass nuts and actually use that as a feed to help adjust them to the hay. That's actually really important for their gut. Yeah.
I want to talk a bit about grass.
I was literally about to say the track livery thing and grass, very interesting.
I've had I come across ponies with laminitis, and my farrier, we were just talking about it before you came on. My farrier said that last week he's had 4 horses with laminitis last week, not all fat little Connemara's or whatever. You know, it's becoming more common in a wider ranging breeds of horses. But like, I'm just going to ask a really blunt question, but like, is grass a problem? Because some people will now say that grass is a problem.
I'm going to be really annoying and give you the answer again. It depends, but actually that is the correct answer. And this is kind of what happens. It's brilliant that we've got access to all this information nowadays. It's lovely we've got open conversations happening on social media, but for some reason things do seem to swing to extremes, and suddenly everybody's saying horses shouldn't have grass. Oh, you know, they're dying because they're on grass. Sorry, I'm being a bit over dramatic, but it completely depends on that individual horse. I have got a handful of horses in my books with my clients that are better off grass. They're really highly laminitic prone. They're struggled with just the even smallest intake of grass, and they're better. It's a very, very small number. Loads of horses definitely need their grass restricted, but then there's a bunch of horses that actually need lots of grass and do well on lots of grass, and it depends entirely on the individual. It really does. And, you know, can we predict that? Well, the best way of, I suppose, predicting it is how are they on grass? Do they put on loads of weight or not? Do they get malformed, like disturbed droppings, disturbed gut? Do they have any other discomfort? If not, and they appear fine and they're doing fine, they're probably fine with grass. But there are many that, yes, definitely need it restricted, because grass at this time of year, now that we've had some rain in certain parts of the country, if you analysed what's going to start growing, you might as well open a bag of competition mix. Similar nutrient composition. So yeah, it depends.
And I think it's hard because, one of my horses, Zora, she had a blood test when she was at the vet, because they were like, she's quite fit and strong, but she's kind of carrying fat in a bit of a way that doesn't look totally like normal, doing some air quotes.
Yeah.
And she had a borderline EMS blood test, slightly insulin resistant blood test, right? I think that's what they were looking at, that insulin levels. And I treat her a bit like she has a metabolic system, so I feed her a balancer that is suitable for metabolic horses. She wears a grazing muzzle in the field, and I try and keep her hay intake more than her grass intake as such. Like, I don't put her out on a super grassy field, but it's becoming a bit of a problem in my brain, because I'm like scared of grass, because sometimes she'll take her grazing muzzle off and she'll have grass glands, and I'm like, oh god, you know, she's never had laminitis, but she's super fit, she can do a 45-minute dressage lesson and she doesn't break a sweat, you know, she's really fit. But yeah, am I right to be scared? Are the grass glands a concerning sign?
Yeah, and for those, again, who are just listening, not watching, I'm nodding my head as you speak. You're doing absolutely all the right things with her, and your scepticism or your concern about her is well founded, because if you got a bit lax, having actually had her tested and seen that she is a little bit EMS or hyperinsulinic, insulin resistant, you know that she's got that genetic propensity for this. Some of them never seem to get it no matter what they eat. So actually being really careful with her is really important. And once you start to see that fat pad deposition, like when they get the little pads, either the neck crest or on either side of the tail, or sometimes they'll get them on their haunches or their behind the shoulders, even though the rest of them are
it was behind her
quite
shoulders.
Slim.
Yeah.
Yeah, they tend to be slight warning signs. So no, you're actually correct to be very, very careful with her.
Okay.
And certainly be very careful with her grass intake. And it's not just the grass that she eats, but the rate she eats it at. So it's not just the total amount of grass, it's the rate of intake that affects the insulin response. So having a grazing muzzle on her is a really good idea.
Yeah.
As long as she keeps it on, like you say.
Yeah, she does keep it on most of the time, and it's the times when she takes it off and then she has grass glands come up, and it's not normal, is it, for horses to have they shouldn't have their grass glands shouldn't become prominent. Would that be fair to say? I'm genuinely asking, I'm not.
Yeah, the grass gland thing's really interesting. I keep asking every vet or specialist that I can about this, and I research it every year, hoping there might be some more information. Nobody really knows exactly what it is. I mean, there's proposals about it being slight allergic response to certain pollens or this or that in the grass. What I would say is yes, it probably reflects a high grass intake. Maybe not in all cases, but it kind of shows you the horse has had lots of grass. For whatever reason, it's obviously due to the it's linked to the saliva glands. So it could be a warning sign if you have a horse that you do need to be careful with a grass intake. But nobody knows really exactly why they get them or what's going on. Some horses get them at certain times of year, not others. But generally, yeah, it's a sign that they're eating lots of grass. So if that could be a problem for your individual horse, then that is a sign worth paying attention to. Yeah.
Interesting. I've got one last question on the grass thing, sorry, before we move on.
That's fine.
Because I had a very interesting conversation when I was at Royal Windsor last weekend, and then you actually posted something, and I'm like, did Claire post that? Because I said that on my Instagram. I don't know.
It's like the listening in to your conversations thing, isn't
Yeah.
it? Claire's tapped in.
Yeah, but I was wondering about, I was learning a bit with this company about diversifying the grazing by having a much wider variety, because like my yard used to be a stud, and I know for a fact that there's a fair amount of ryegrass in the grass. And my old landlord used to be like a really keen fertilizer, and since he's not there anymore, I don't do that. I let a lot more of the kind of flora change as much as I can, and so we have more weeds. For example, there's thistle and some nettle, and the clover comes and goes, and the buttercups comes and goes, and that kind of thing. But what I was learning about is really re-sowing grazing with this like older kind of more diverse grasses and more. But you did a post about how I didn't know whether you thought it was any good at all, but that you do still have to be careful of the sugar. I'm just very interested in this. How can we make it more sustainable for our horses to eat grass? Right, done.
Yeah, it's a lovely idea, and I always get huge kind of arguments going on when I post about this, but I've got the experience and I've learned the hard way, and I've learned from some mistakes, and so it's a good theory that we could adjust our grasslands to make them healthy for horses. We can sow old-fashioned grass species. We can get rid of our ryegrass, which tends to be higher in calories, energy, and higher in sugar, but not always. It's a nice idea. However, there's a really big but here, and anybody with the experience of having done this and played around with it or worked with nutrition for years will know you still might have to limit their intake in terms of it's not just about sugar. This is really important. It's about the energy of the calories as well. You can have a low sugar grass, but if they're still eating too much of it, they're still having too many calories, they'll still put on fat and they'll still get problems, even if the sugar intake isn't high. So we have to be really careful we're not focusing so much on sugar that we forget about the energy or the calories. So yeah, good theory, but you have to watch, definitely. Ryegrass generally won't persist if it's not fertilised. It needs fertilisation to persist. So if you don't fertilise and you encourage other broadleaves or other types of grasses, and if you oversow, that will develop your pasture into something more suitable for leisure horses with relatively low energy requirements. But you have to watch, and I've had my own place in Wiltshire for about 12 years, did loads of experiments on the pasture. And that picture you saw on that post actually was one of our areas of pasture that I'd let go a bit wild. And it was full of flowers. It's still way oversupplied calories. I still had to limit it. But we did all sorts of experiments. So a couple of things I would say from what I learned on that, and I learned so much more than I ever learned from a textbook, I have to admit. I'm not saying textbooks are bad. Academic studies are really important, but you also learn a lot out in the field, literally the field, is that if you're oversowing, you want to make sure that you've got your persistent, the grasses you don't want inhibited. So you're better to overgraze before you oversow, or else you might be wasting your money on the seeds. And then the other thing is that I soon learned, what you sow and what persists depends so much on your soil and how you manage the grass. So you might sow a whole load of seeds and think, great, I'm going to create this horse-friendlier pasture. But whether or not the plants from the seeds or even the seedlings that you sow persist is another question. It depends on the soil. And I would say if you are going to do this, speak to a real specialist seed supplier company that understands what type of soil you have and probably gets you to test your soil, because then what you sow is more likely to persist. So there's a bit more to it than just...
They were talking about things like yellow rattle and all sorts of these grass inhibitors that mean that they discourage some types of grass and encourage others, basically.
Yeah, and yellow rattle is... I experimented with yellow rattle and I ended up with far too much of it. But if you do... So yellow rattle is a lovely little yellow flower. It's actually poisonous to horses. I'm laughing.
Gosh.
It's not that poisonous to horses, but you wouldn't want them to have that to eat nothing else. That would be really harmful. But that's generally not how it's used. You sprinkle it in. It's a parasite type of plant, and it inhibits the grass. So that can allow your other broadleafs to get hold. But it's an annual, so as long as you cut it and get rid of the seeds, it won't go mad. So if you use it and you end up with far too much of it and you panic, just cut it and remove the seed. Cut it before it seeds. And because it's an annual, it will gradually just not grow anymore. Yeah.
As with all of what we're learning today, it depends.
Can put that on a t-shirt as well. I think I have one closing question for me. I've really enjoyed this conversation. We had a lovely episode recently about caring for the older horse. We have quite a few listeners who do have much older horses, and so beyond the usual of feeds that are easy to eat for horses with maybe not the same teeth that they used to, and feeds for horses who are dropping weight, higher calorie, etc. Is there anything else that you would think about when caring for the older horse beyond the nuances of an individual, obviously?
Yeah, it's they're really specialist to feed, because you have to, like you said, it's just such a good point, when they start losing their dental function, and it might not be obvious, they might not have actual obvious problems, but they'll start reducing their forage intake, and that's when they'll struggle to maintain condition. Really important to replace that, but it's really important to replace the fibre, going right back to where we started talking about fibre, as well as the calories or the energy, because what you'll find, some owners will get the kind of veteran feeds in, but maybe won't have that knowledge about fibre, and then the horse will end up with not the healthiest of guts because they're not getting that fibre replaced. So you really need specialist feeds that replace both the fibre and the macronutrients and the energy. I have actually again got a free article, because this is something that I feel quite passionate about, and I want to make sure that owners had access to this information for free, although I charge for most of my services. I have got a free article on how to feed older horses, because I think it's really important. That's available. I think that's available on my website. I mean, if somebody can't find anything, just drop me an email.
We'll link to it.
Yeah, because it's a real... They're specialists to feed. It's a whole different thing feeding these older horses. And it's really, really important, because their immune system naturally gets suppressed with age. Their muscle, sarcopenia, their muscle gradually drops with age. So nutrition's even more important for them to keep them healthy and comfortable in their older years, yeah.
Lovely.
I've got one last question, Claire, that I put in our email, so hopefully you're prepared for this one. If you had one message that you could give to every horse person in the world, what would it be?
It's a 3-part message, and I didn't really have to think about this much, because it's what I talk about all the time. The first part of it would be listen to your horse, really observe them. Sometimes we can get so caught up with what we've read or what we've learned that we forget to really, really monitor that individual horse in front of us. And I'd say keep records. I know it's a bit boring, but keeping records really helps that. Secondly, I'd say then be very sceptical about what you read nowadays. There's a lot of very compelling stuff out there that is actually just baloney. There's no sense in it. Be careful who you believe, work with specialists, choose your specialists with great care. And then thirdly, don't forget to just relax and enjoy your horses. You know, they're an amazing creature that we get to share our lives with, and sometimes we can get so caught up on doing the right thing for them, we forget to just relax and enjoy them. And I think so that's really important to remember to do that as well.
Thank you, Claire. That was wonderful.
This has been really nice. Really nice. Just a very clarifying clarifying conversation of just, because I came to this, as I think a lot of people who listen to this maybe will have, which is like feeling like they really want to do the right thing, obviously, but also feeling quite overwhelmed with all of the conversations. And as with so many things in the world right now, horses and beyond, it just goes one way or the other, and there's almost no nuance in the middle, and it becomes very scary when it's related to health. So actually just breaking it down a bit has been really useful, and actually maybe taking away some of the mystique, because I think sometimes companies and people want us to feel like it's more complicated than it is, so that we rely on them, and actually learning that like it's not, and it's okay to learn about it ourselves. It's been really good.
I remember, to finish up, I remember I had a brand reach out to me, and they came to the yard and they did some diet reviews. This is quite a long time ago now. Big feed company, I won't name any names, but they were like, in the end, the reality of the conversation was, they were like, so a chaff and a balancer? And I was like, hang on a minute. You know, which is similar to what you've been saying, you know, enough fibre, enough forage, and then this balancing, or these minerals to make sure, minerals, vitamins to make sure that everything's in balance. And I'm thinking to myself, I couldn't count on my hand the number of feeds that this company feed. And actually, for the standardised horse, this is what they were saying. And I was like, this is interesting, isn't it? Like, actually, when you kind of lose all the marketing and you really get down to the bare bones of it, that's what they were suggesting. And it was, I always remember it being a very I was like, there's more to this. I need to look into this. So yeah, very interesting for sure.
Yeah, I've had a few feed companies reach out to me to work with me, and I've said no to all of them because I do think there's something, and this is more of an influencer thing, but I do think there's something about companies who want to work with people because their horses already look good. Nobody reaches out to you because your horse doesn't look great. So, no, not that I'm tooting my own horn, but I think Harley looks fabulous. And I think that's quite interesting. And similarly, you know, when I told them what he ate, it wasn't actually what you said, which is vitamins and minerals. It was, he could probably have this and this and this. And I just remember thinking, I don't think he needs it, actually. So, yeah, it's interesting. But this has been wonderful. Really enjoyed it.
So, Claire, what we'll do is we'll put your information in the show notes below. So if anybody has any questions or they want to get in touch with you to work with you directly, then they can do so. But thank you so much for giving us your time today. I hope this has been a very valuable conversation for people.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate, you know, I'm as you can tell, quite passionate about my subject. I'm also passionate about demystifying it so that we just reduce our stress levels. Like, it's quite tough having horses, you know, and how busy we are nowadays and the cost of everything. So we need to remember to enjoy them, and that's the kind of basis of my work, is that it's if horse owners want to come and work with me, they'll find somewhere where they can get support, guidance, reduce their stress levels, get peace of mind, demystify everything, and just be able to go and enjoy the horses.
Absolutely. We talk about livery yards and how they're a difficult place a lot of the time because you often have so many opinions. Exactly. You pulled a face there, because it's true, because it's complicated, right? We talk about that a lot, and I think that can be a very, you know, you have 10 opinions and no one really knows what they're doing, because it's all based off a very small portal of evidence, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not easy out there, but you know, you doing this podcast there's a lot of work going on now. You know, people can reach specialists online, which is wonderful. So there are places to go to get good information, but that's why I said, you know, be careful. I'd say for horse owners, be careful about what you believe, because not everybody's telling the truth out there, sadly. Just being aware of that is a good thing. But there are loads of great resources nowadays, so we are fortunate. Although it can get confusing, we are fortunate in that we do have a large number of really good resources to help us.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you.
Look out for your registered nutritionists.
Yeah, be careful. Anyone can call themselves a nutritionist at the moment.
Registered.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
There
And you asked some really great questions.
may well be round 2, Claire, because people
Yeah,
I'm
I'd
sure
love to.
will have their questions. So we'll get you back for another episode, another season. Thank you so much.
I'll look forward to it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening this week. As always, if you've got any questions for us, just drop us an email. The email is in the show notes, and we'll see you for next time.
See you next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.